Over the weekend, Politico ran a story condemning the right's obsession with having babies, confirming once and for all that desiring a family is now officially right wing. Where does this baby making obsession come from? It may have to do with the fact that the U.S. fertility rate hit an all-time low of 1.6 children per woman in 2023, well below the 2.1 child per woman replacement rate. Young people are opting out of the American dream and family creation altogether. On this episode of Forge and Anvil, I will be joined by Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project to discuss whether or not the family unit can be preserved for the next generation of Americans. All this and more, so stick around. Welcome to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations to sharpen ourselves for the cultural, political, and spiritual war that we are living in. My name is Connor. I am host of this podcast. I am a husband, a father, and a follower of Christ Jesus, doing my best to represent him well wherever I go. As I mentioned in the opening, I am joined by Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project. So, Terry, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Connor. Really excited to be here. Terry Schilling, I'm president of American Principles Project. I lovingly call it the NRA for families. We don't do guns, but we treat families just like the NRA treats gun owners. They're our constituent, and our goal at American Principles Project is to make the family the most powerful special interest group in the country. But that's the least interesting thing about me. We just had our seventh child, Tucker. And they range from 18 all the way to 2.5 months. So this whole big family thing, I'm really living it. We just want to put the family at the heart of public policy. It's a very real thing for me. I'm living this life. I have to deal with these people, and I want to make sure that families are well represented when it comes to public policy and our legislation that's being passed.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on number 7. That's awesome to hear. And thanks again for joining. And for you listening, before we get started, feel free to go on over to our Substack, forgeandanvil.substack.com. That is where I host the show. I have some free writings that you can check out there. If you put in your email, you get episodes of the show sent straight to your email, as well as our In the Van segments where I break down important news stories that you need to know, especially if you live in the state of Tennessee, in my minivan, hence the name In the Van, in about 20 minutes or less. So feel free to check that out. That's forgeandanvil.substack.com. We are live on YouTube, Rumble, and X, so be sure to repost this stream wherever you are on Facebook, whatever the case may be. We appreciate that. Of course, like, share, subscribe. It really does help us out. But that being said, let's go ahead and dive straight in. So Terry, I know you and I were both talking about this clip that went viral from MSNBC. I'm going to go ahead and play it for our audience, for those who have not yet heard it. It is a pretty wild clip that I was real shocked to see that was actually played on MSNBC. So without further ado, let's play the clip.
For the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. That is the social compact breaking down. People aged 30 to 34, 60% of them in 1990 had one child. Now it's 27%. People are opting out of America. They're not optimistic about it. They're not having kids. Young people aren't having sex. They're not meeting. They're not mating. The pool of emotionally and economically viable men shrinks every day, which lessens household formation. So we have a real issue. Young people are enraged. So it turns every cut, every movement into an opportunistic infection because, quite frankly, they are just pissed off. They look up, they see wealth, exceptional wealth across my generation and people in certain industries, and they are really struggling. Their purchasing power is going down, and the incumbents create artificial scarcity on campus. We take pride in rejecting 90% of our applicants, so the incumbents who already have a degree see their degree go up in value. We get very concerned with housing and traffic once we own the housing. Housing permits are sequestered from young people. Housing prices have gone from $290 to $420 in the last 4 years. So a young person, a house, stocks that I don't own skyrocket in value. Let's have COVID relief and flush the markets and take assets way up, because if 1 million people dying would be bad, it would be tragic if I got less wealthy. And we're doing it on their credit card. Young people have every reason to be enraged, and every issue they see, they look up, they get angry, and they see someone doing better than them. And then every day it is speedballed in their face that they are failing, that they are not doing as well as everyone around them. We have lost the script. Our kids are more anxious and more depressed and more obese and more addicted. And we have made a purposeful decision to let this happen by ensuring the people around this table stay wealthy at the cost of young people.
So obviously that clip, it was crazy to see that on MSNBC because they typically hide that stuff deep into the trenches of the internet, and they try their best to ignore it. But here it was on mainstream news television. So it was pretty wild to see. There's a lot to unpack there, and we'll get into a lot of that. But Terry, first I want to get your initial response to that.
Well, it's quite the indictment, right, of the entire system, and you can't just put this on Biden. I mean, although he represents everything that that guy was talking about, and has certainly contributed to that. But this is an indictment of the 20th century, right? We've made a lot of changes in public policy. Our culture changed dramatically. We had, I think it's all roots back to both the New Deal, this new line of thinking about the economy, and if the economy is supposed to serve individuals and families, or if it's supposed to serve some, bureaucratic leaders and their goals. But also you have to consider, I think the thing that he talks about that really hurts my heart the most is where he talks about how young people aren't having sex. Right. You just go back a few more decades and sex was something that like everyone was doing. They had a sexual revolution in this country, and essentially every left-wing Marxist, revolution, everything that they do, it always wrecks the thing that the revolution is about. Right. So Marxist economic revolutions destroy economies. The cultural revolution destroys their cultures. But the sexual revolution in America has destroyed sex, right? And we now have a situation where young men are more likely to see pornography at younger and younger ages than they are to have sex for the first time. I think it was over 25% of men under 30 are now identifying as virgins. They've never had sexual relations. That was at 8% when I was in high school. And you could take this for what it is, right? I don't think, though, that it's not for lack of trying, or maybe it's for lack of trying, but it's not for lack of want. You have the rise of the involuntary celibates who are not able to get any girls. I want to say, like, obviously, sex should be refined at, restrained in marriage. That's obviously the ideal, right, and with an openness to life. But things are really spiraling out of control. You have almost every major American institution has now broken down. The dollar is not controllable anymore. Housing prices are going up still, while the inflation rates are being increased. The whole system's broken, and we broke it. And by we, I mean the elected officials and the policymakers that we have in DC. I don't know how it ends. What I do know, though, Connor, is that when things are hitting the fan, I want as many kids as possible around me that it can help and address, different problems as they come up. Many hands make for light work. That's the very tried and true saying. So, my family doesn't know what's going to happen. I don't think any of us really do. We know it's not going to be great, that there are going to be some consequences to all of this pumping and dumping and printing and spending and all of these reckless decisions that our elites have made for us. But I feel comfortable knowing that I'm raising my kids right, teaching them the right values, and hopefully they all pitch in when things really get rough. But it's a real indictment of America's culture and the system of government that we have. It doesn't really serve families anymore, and I don't even know if that's the goal anymore, but it used to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned talking about these men that are foregoing the creation of family, and then you see that, like you said, the sexual revolution destroyed sex. And a lot of these men, it's ultimately because they're virgins in regards to they have not had physical relations with a woman, but they're having it all the time, typically with pornography. It's funny because back in the day, when you think about just going back to like an agrarian society of a couple hundred years ago, you had to be a really rich man to see multiple naked women. Nowadays in America, you have to try. You have to actually go out of your way to attempt to not see naked women online, even on Twitter or even YouTube. I mean, YouTube's not necessarily what we in the modern day would call R-rated, but it's definitely probably R-rated from a couple decades back. Honestly, we're a little bit numb to how pornographic our society is as a whole, and that's one of the amazing things I love about APP is you guys have been battling the porn industry, and I've had John Schweppe on multiple times now talking about your guys' efforts there, and that's incredible to see. But yeah, and so we won't tug on that thread too much tonight, just since we've already covered that in the past. But really economically, you mentioned when it hits the fan, you want to have as many children around. I mean, think about an agrarian society again. You know, the family unit was absolutely essential. What were you going to do? You know, there wasn't these high end retirement communities for you to go and play golf until you get to the point where someone has to wheel you around in a wheelchair and take care of you from basically retirement to death. You know, that's not a thing that we had back in the day. We only had the family unit. Your retirement plan was your children, and your children recognized that, and your grandchildren was their retirement plan, and so on. And you know, people on the left would condemn that as selfish, and you know, they'd probably compare that to chattel slavery or something stupid like that. But you know, it kept family units together, and the reality is, it forced us to have a cohesive culture, and it wasn't done begrudgingly, because there was a lot more cohesiveness between the American family before big government honestly came in and started attacking it. So, I mean, would you see a similar, or let me rephrase that? Where do you think that this trend started to break down? Would you put it back as early as just Woodrow Wilson and the early days of big government, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, if I'm being honest and real, and this is not a value judgment. This is not whether or not I think that this certain thing that I'm about to mention is a very touchy topic for people. It's not whether I think it's morally good or morally bad or should be legal or should be illegal. But I think you can obviously trace this back to artificial birth control, right? Yeah. You have the situation before artificial birth control. And first of all, in America, artificial birth control had a very hard time taking off. And it was because in the early days, Americans didn't want to play God. They viewed life and death, you know, babies and dying, as something that God was in charge of. If you got pregnant, that was God saying that he was willing some being, into being, into actually becoming a human being. And people didn't want to take it on. But once the mass adoption of artificial birth control took place, you then basically disrupted the complementary nature and relationship between men and women. You separated procreation from the act of procreation, and it became a something you did to relax. It became leisure activity. Instead of being something that was very deliberate, something that was sacred, something that was reserved for your future spouse, something that was reserved for the mother of your children or the father of your children. And it became a leisurely activity. And from there, you started to see the breakdown of society. You know, men and women in some mystical way that we don't really fully understand really depend on each other. We both need each other. Men need women, women need men. And once you start to cause disorder and chaos and dysfunction in those relations, all of society starts to break down. And you think about it, when you attack humanity at its conception, which is the sexual act, you disorder it all throughout its existence. And so if I was to trace it all back to one thing, it's not big government. It's not, Woodrow Wilson. I mean, yeah, he did a lot of bad things. I think the direct election of senators was an absolute nightmare. It totally made Congress meaningless and the Senate a worthless body. But at the end of the day, I think that things really started breaking down for the American family when people adopted massively artificial birth control. I don't think people needed to. I think a lot of people, could have had more kids and been just fine. And we would be a lot better off. You're always better off with more people than not. You want more people able to help and around you. You don't want more criminals, but strong families don't tend to produce criminals. They produce good, honest citizens. But yeah, I mean, look, I hate saying it because of how controversial it is. Again, it's not a value judgment. It's just basically saying that thing disrupted families. It disrupted the relationship between men and women. It led to a lot of other bad stuff like abortion. But once you separated the procreative act from procreation, you're going to have a lot of insanity that ensues, and we've seen that play out over the last several decades.
Yeah, I agree, and unfortunately, I think it's a result of rampant feminism. And that's, of course, a sacred cow that you're not supposed to touch these days either. But, I mean, unfortunately, it's just the reality that the messages like men need or women need men like fish needs a bicycle. I mean, that does something to a culture over time. If you hear a lie repeated enough times, you start to believe it. And I think that really seeped into the culture. And then with the advent of widespread birth control and women in the workplace, which again, I'm not passing judgment on women in the workplace as much as I'm saying, to your point, it's just a fact that women start to prioritize their career because they start to be told that they can control this thing that previously was not controllable beyond really barbaric means. And of course, we can argue that birth control is still barbaric, but it's less, it's more out of sight, out of mind. As far as what it accomplishes. But then, of course, also women entering the workforce doubled the amount of workers. And that, of course, causes wages to stagnate and things like that as well. And unfortunately, it's just the reality that we're just dealing with in facts here. Like we saw in the 60s, as more and more of that messaging spread, more and more of the family began to break down. So that was something that was mentioned in that video that we played. They talked a lot about how young people in their 30s are making less than their parents did at the same
Connor,
time.
can I just add something to what you were just
please.
talking about with women in the workforce? So there's this big misconception that like before the 70s or 60s or whatever, that women didn't work. And it's just not true. They worked, but they worked later in life. And even before then, women still went into factories. They still had jobs. Like they still were part of society. They didn't have as many rights as before, but they would go into work after their families were done, after they couldn't have children anymore. That was when they really started their career. They actually like prioritized things to put families and kids first and to serve their families before serving Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or anything. But now we've had a society where like it's more honorable. Just think about how ridiculous this is. The communists, the progressives, the Marxists who think that profits are bad, that rich white men are evil, like they're fine with all of these women dedicating their lives to rich white men getting richer, right? And helping make Jeff Bezos a 100 billionaire or 200 billionaire or 300 billionaire. But it's not honorable to serve your family and to raise the next generation. I mean, hell, where's the pride here? Like, why not raise kids that have progressive values, right? Like in my family, like we're raising our kids to be honest, good, hardworking people that love their country and serve their neighbors and their family and friends. Like, why not do that? Why not create little communists? I don't understand. Like, why not procreate and create new little communists so you can take over the country? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's really like self-deprecation. It's like an anti-human, antisocial ideology that's taken over. I just want to clarify, because my mom is going back into the workforce now after having 10 kids. She's paying taxes. She feels great about herself. She's very, after raising 10 kids, you got management skills, right? Like I would hire you at a company that I own to manage my employees because you've done such a great job of managing your 10 kids. Like there's just a lot of skill sets that people forget. And sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think it's important to clarify this stuff. Like, it's not like women were chained to the kitchen or chained to the stove forever. Like they raised their families, but then they went back to work and they actually lived lives. And we just need to get rid of all these feminist narratives because they've really embedded themselves across the board.
Yeah, exactly. Kristen Ivory in the chat said people are becoming too selfish today to put in the 20 years needed to be a good parent, the sacrifices. Yeah, and that's the reality is there is sacrifices. I mean, it's a balance. So you don't want to pretend that parenthood is easy and that there's no sacrifices involved. But to your point, it's not a life sentence for women to take care of their children, especially like Kristen mentioned, put in the 20 years needed to be a good parent. Well, it's true that you're going to be putting in 20 years of being a good parent, but the reality is it's really mostly the first, and you're much further ahead. I've got 2 children, but they're both under age 3. But from what I understand, it's really just the first 10 years or so where they really are dependent upon you. And then from there, it slowly becomes more of a mentorship role as you give them more responsibility and you become more of a guide into preparing them for life, as opposed to, in the toddler years where I'm at right now, where we're running around physically having to restrain children and trying to protect them from the world at large. I mean, and my wife's already talking about like, what will I do when I'm, in my 40s and our kids are not needing me as much? I might have to go and do something. I said, yeah, honey, maybe you'll serve the church more. Maybe you'll do something, so my point is, it's really not a huge window that we're talking about where you're truly needed at home, where that stability from a stay-at-home mom is so crucial. And so the reality is, like, your career can wait and you could still have a full-blown career when the children no longer need to be attached at the hip.
No, that's exactly right. And it's like at 5 years old, that's when they go to kindergarten. 5, right?
Yeah.
So like, between your last kid, you got 5 years to wait until you go back in the workforce. Like, and it's okay. You can work. You're not a bad parent for going to work. Lots of parents work. We have a lot of households where both parents work. It's okay. You don't need to feel guilty about it. But no, it's often framed as an either or, and I just hate it. But I like that you point out that it's not easy. It's challenging, right? It's definitely a sacrifice. It's not Instagram parenting. Right. It's not always, going on vacation, Disney World and all going. No, I took my kids to Disney World. It was the worst experience I've had in a long time. And that's okay because it was a memory and the kids loved it. I was stressed out of my mind, but it was a sacrifice. But the thing is, Connor, like, you have 2, right? So like you've been learning this, if you haven't already, which is that nothing worth doing is easy.
Right.
Everything that's challenging is usually worth doing, unless it's mindless. And that's when I lose my cool, is when I'm having to clean up mindless messes around the house.
Right.
But listen, you create memories, you make sacrifice. There's this, Les Miserables. Oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the author. He has a quote, and he says, "You can give without loving, but you can't love without giving." Right? You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. And you really can't love someone without sacrificing. We hear love is love. We hear love repeated. I just want to love someone. People don't know what love is. And I think that's a big deficit in our society, is they've never experienced it, right? Or they haven't been grateful for the love that they've been shown, right? There's a spirit of ingratitude in this country that's prevalent. There's a lack of love, and it's really sad. But when you've experienced love, when you've really seen someone sacrifice for you, it's contagious. It's tough to keep it in, right? And I think ultimately that's why my wife and I keep having kids, is we were both really, really loved growing up. We were kind of spoiled. We were disciplined. We were treated right, and we had great childhoods. And so we want to pass it on to as many little kids as we can. And I don't know. It's a very special thing. It's very important, and so many people are missing out on it. You're gonna die someday, and those kids that you sacrifice for, they're either gonna be at your bedside helping you and taking care of you, or they're not. And that can happen by being a bad parent or not being a parent at all. And I think you at least gotta give it a try.
Yeah. Exactly. And something that I do have a big passion about, and this is shifting gears a little bit, but we've been talking about how, a woman can work and both parents can work, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Now, I personally do think that the way we are designed, I think that women thrive in the home. I'm not going to bind someone's conscience and say that they have to be a stay-at-home mom, but I do think that I've watched it with my own wife. My wife was going to college when we met, and she ended up not finishing her degree because she just felt like she was doing it out of obligation. She was straining every day to keep on going to school, and she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And I said, honey, please go be a stay-at-home mom. But we are kind of a rare exception among our generation, especially. There are very few people of our age that are single income families, and so that's something that I'm really big about wanting to see a return. So I mean, is that something that APP, have you put a lot of focus on the emphasis on like single income families?
Yeah, it's our goal is to eliminate the tax burden for families. Same thing that Hungary's been doing. A lot of other countries are pursuing this because their birth rates are in the toilet. But yeah, we need to make it as easy as possible to raise a family off of one income. I was reading this book a few years ago. It's called Populism and Elitism. I'm sorry, Populism and Elitism, and it's by my friend Jeff Bell, who's since passed. But he brought up this point about prosperity and what it really means. And he uses the example of the Greeks. The Greeks measured prosperity by how many days a year you had to work in order to survive. So at the height, the Greeks had this olive bloom, or this olive prosperity from all the olive trees. It was like huge boom, and the economy was going through the roof. Well, they only had to work like 36 days a year in order to, make ends meet and, pay for all their housing and their food and all that. Today, like you fast forward, we do not have that type of prosperity, right? There's a very small group of people that have that type of prosperity, but most Americans, if you have a family, you've not only got to work full time as the father, the mother's got to work some too. And so we got to start getting back to what prosperity is really about, which is working less for more money. That's the goal. That should be the goal with the economy. The economy, I think we've lost the plot. It's not about GDP. It's about hours that you get to spend with your family. It's about getting further ahead. And we've definitely lost that in America. I mean, people are so working it. You have the gig economy where people get off their 9 to 5 and then go drive Uber to make sure they can pay their bills. Like, that's not okay. It's not healthy. You're going to die young. You're supposed to be spending that time with your family. That's not prosperity. That is the opposite. You're being milked. You're being bilked. You're being really taken advantage of, and we should reject it entirely. I don't know exactly how to get there. We've got to make some decisions, but I think the way out is through, which is for people like you and I to deliberately choose to live off of a single income, right? A lot of people make the mistake of getting married, both having jobs, and then buying a home that is based off of both your combined incomes. That's a mistake, because then you're both locked into working full time. Get a house off of a single income and work out from there. Add additions, expand. You can do a lot of home improvement. We got to get craftier. We got to get thriftier. It's just how we're going to have to do it. But you can get out of this mess, but only through. And that's by starting your own families and choosing not to go along with all the so-called rules of this modern American society.
Yeah, I agree. And love them or hate them, resources like Dave Ramsey, I mean, that's done wonders for my wife and I. We were debt free before we had any kids, and we were able to put a decent down payment down on a home. Now, we did have to move. That was something that the video we put at the beginning said as well. It said that houses went from $290 to $420 in 4 years. And we saw that, especially we were in the greater Phoenix area, and we had to move from Arizona completely in order to become homeowners because it was just so ridiculous. And that is something that I think we have to kind of do a juggling act sometimes of the right wing has done a great job of individual responsibility and emphasizing that. But we've also done it to a point where we do ignore when there are real challenges oftentimes, because there's this boomer pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. In fact, Hillbilly Homemaker is someone on Twitter. She said, when Social Security runs out and the boomers start crying about not having any money, I'm just going to tell them to get a job and pick themselves up by their bootstraps. And I mean, obviously she's being blunt and harsh there, but there's some reality that there is an older generation that has been borrowing the younger generation's future in terms of the way that things operate in DC, and the way that we created a culture of consumer debt. Even, I mean, that was not a thing, a couple generations back, but so that's something that I have a big concern about. I think we're kind of sitting on a political powder keg too. We do have these young individuals that are becoming a permanent renting class, and they don't have any buy-in to the American project. And I think it's just going to take a very charismatic individual who believes in these sort of socialistic ideas to really rally these individuals for a true upheaval of the system as we know it. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping that it can swing back the opposite way and we can deregulate the economy and get things going that way. But that's a real concern of mine that I think we're going to have some serious conversations about addressing these financial hurdles that we have put in place for individuals under age of 35.
Mm-hmm. No. And look, the system we've created where everyone's got to get a college degree. Well, what's that led to? It's led to $200,000 college degrees.
Yep.
Really, you look at the average cost of college tuition for 1 year, it's around $50,000 in this country. That's not even Ivy League, right? That's just like middle of the road, normal college, $50,000 a year, $200,000.
Right.
Like, do you understand like how much more you could get just from getting a house at $200,000? My wife and I are having this conversation. Is I would rather give my kids money for a down payment on a house than pay for a worthless college degree. Like, we could figure we've really screwed up in that. We've allowed companies to require college degrees for jobs that don't require college degrees. It's absolutely insane. And like, Abraham Lincoln, probably one of the best presidents we've ever had, probably one of the best attorneys that have ever existed in America, way better than any attorney today. He didn't go to law school. Like, Abraham Lincoln didn't go to law school. He was trained by a lawyer. He studied under a lawyer. And that's how it used to be. You didn't get you basically got qualified by working underneath someone, and who you worked underneath was your reputation, your credibility. And so if you studied under a prominent lawyer, you would have a much better gig going forward. But now we've outsourced that to colleges and universities that aren't teaching our kids anything. I mean, college kids today are like way dumber than any other kids in history. Like they actually, you're better off not sending your kids to school because they're going to have to unlearn a lot of stuff about American history and about what this country really stands for. They don't learn math. It's like 4 years of drugs and sex and no learning, but indoctrination. It's totally crazy. And we wonder why we live in a screwed up world, but we've got to crack down the academia on the academic system in this country. It's absolutely out of control, but we have absolutely created an economy where families aren't important, where only individuals matter. If it's just individuals running the show, then a $200,000 degree isn't that bad. But when it's both the mom and the dad have to get college degrees, well, that's $400,000 now in student loan debt. Having a family doesn't really make any sense right now, right? It's totally backwards. Like, if you think about what your life is really supposed to be about, it's supposed to be about your life. What's your life? Your life is your family. It's Christmas with your kids. It's Christmas with your parents, your aunts and uncles. It's family should be the center of everything. But now our job is the center of everything. It's not right. It's the product of left-wing policies, I think, combined with right-wing negligence. It's really, really bad. It's really bad, and we're experiencing it now.
Yeah. Well, something too, and it comes from this left-wing ideology, the civil rights movement, whether you think all of it was great or all of it was bad, whatever, there's varying opinions on that. I think there's even some, it's a nuanced thing. I think that there's some good intentions with the civil rights that had bad execution even. But one of the things that did happen is, we banned things like IQ testing for job placement. things like that, because it was, underneath the guise of racism, a lot of these things had to go away. And because we were defending people from racism where there wasn't necessarily racism, we've made it to where now college had to become a credentialing exercise, because when you can't ask certain things and you can't put someone through certain tests during the job searching process, you have to have some way of weeding out individuals that are going to be no good for your company. And so that's where the wide placement into college really began to take place, because employers needed a college degree to kind of prove your merit. Nowadays, I think what's happening is the reverse is beginning to happen. I think it's going to take a long time for it to completely flip on its head. But I think that there are many individuals who realize that in order to promote true meritocracy, they actually need to hire individuals who have not gone to college. Because to your point, those who went to college have to spend time unlearning. I mean, I went to college mostly. I've told the story briefly on the podcast before, but I felt a calling from God to go to college, and as a result I went to college, but I was not planning on it. In fact, I went to college several years out of high school because I knew college wasn't for me. And there's a lot of reasons why I could say that happened. Most of them are personal. Very few of them academically did I feel like college prepared me for the real world. If anything, I think it really just filled it removed my ability to think and act in a way where I would take risks like I used to do prior to college and things like that. And it kind of quells the entrepreneurial spirit in a way, because it's sort of a system that you can run yourself through to sort of check the boxes to make sure that you can secure yourself a good paying job. Well, when you feel secure like that, you don't take risks. And, the entrepreneurial spirit is a lot of what's probably going to get us out of a lot of this mess that we've been describing today. Because, how's a man going to provide for a family on a single income? He'll probably have to become an entrepreneur and create a business that actually pays him good enough to afford it. Unless he's just going to run a real tight budget and Dave Ramsey's real hard,
No, that's exactly right. And the thing is these kids all got college degrees thinking that they would get good jobs. Well, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not able to get jobs that are even paying off their student loans anymore. They're still living with their parents. Right. And so you have a whole generation that's just lost. They don't even, they play video games. It's so bad, Connor. Thing is, they're opening pot shops everywhere.
Yeah.
Sports betting is legal everywhere. All this energy that these guys spend a lot of time on their sports betting, a lot of time researching the lines and the scores of previous games and how this player is doing, how's he's feeling. We're wasting all this time and energy in worthless things that don't actually produce anything. Sports betting it's a fun leisurely activity. I don't judge you I play sports bets. It's okay, but it's not productive. It's not what you want your society really focusing a huge amount of time on. Pot shops, they're everywhere. You don't want your society really building up the pot industry. That's a waste of time. It causes depression. We're wasting all this time and energy, and it's opportunity that's being squandered and flushed on the toilet. And there's real consequences to that. And the thing is right now you look at the wages after graduation for various degrees, whether it's business or pre-law or education or communications. All of that compared to what an apprentice for an electrician gets after they're done with their apprenticeship, it doesn't make any sense to go to college anymore. You might as well become a plumber or an electrician. And I'm not saying that as derogatory. We all need electricians. We all need plumbers. These are good dudes. And if you've ever I've befriended my plumber and my electrician, and they're the coolest dudes, and they're super smart. They know way more about this country. They know way more about life and how to support a family and right and wrong. And they know how to do math really, really well, way better than anyone with a college degree. So I'm thinking about, I got 4 sons, right? Out of my 7 kids. I want them all to go into the trades, get into carpentry, get into electrical, get into plumbing, do something with your hands. Cause we need plumbing, We need indoor plumbing, right? We need indoor water and toilets and everything. We need electricity. We need all this stuff to survive. Those things can never go out of style. And in fact, the more digital our world gets, the more you need electricians. So like, I'm going to be pushing my kids into becoming electricians and plumbers, like the physical trades, because that's where the real money is. And I just want them to have families. Like my goal as a human being is to have like 100 grandkids. Like that's like the dream. 100 grandkids minimum. If I get under 100 grandkids, I'm gonna feel like a failure.
That's awesome. That'd be the dream. I mean, imagine Christmas with that crowd. That's so
phenomenal.
cool. That's awesome. Yeah, no, and I feel that. I mean, that's where my wife and I are at. We've just decided to release that completely. You know, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about you're confused why these individuals don't just on the left don't just try to have more kids and have more little communists and kind of take over the culture that way. But the reality is, I think it's truly spiritual. I think that there is an enemy out there who hates Adam, and he hates Adam's seed. He hates the God who created him, and he does what he can to attack those of us who are made Imago Dei. And I think that the reality is, like, my wife and I mean, we both grew up in the church, believers, devout Christians, and but at the same time, even with our culture, the culture has seeped into the church, and we had a cultural mindset of when we got married, we were on birth control, and we were doing our best to plan out, oh, we're going to be married for this many years before we have our first, and God absolutely just wrecked us with that. He completely pulled the rug out from us, like, no. But it took a few real key moments where God really pointed out, like, no, I'm God and you are not in control, and you're trying to control something that is not up to you ultimately. And we've gone from that to now we are just desiring to have as many children as God will bless us with. And Psalm 127 says that children are a gift from God, and they are like arrows in the hands of a mighty warrior. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. And we really hope that our quiver will be very full. We hope that we can be competing with the Schillings one day for how many we have around the table for holidays. But it's a spiritual thing. We have a spirit of Moloch that is in our culture that is demanding sacrifices via Planned Parenthood and others. And unfortunately, our culture has not gone unscathed by the spiritual influence of these demonic spirits that ultimately just want to see image bearers of the living God destroyed in the womb and destroyed even outside the womb.
No, that's exactly right. And it's a spiritual battle, and it's like, it's narcissism, right? Like these if these people were actually concerned about the future or actually concerned about society as a whole, yes, they'd be having little Marxist babies and training them to be communists, and teaching them all the communist ways and about Marxism. But they're just narcissists.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm a Christian, so like I view my job is to just let God control how many kids I have, and they'll spread the word of God and get it all over and spread truth. Right. They're not even that passionate about what they believe. They're just passionate about themselves. Right. Yeah. Like I've been asked to come on a show in the next week to talk about dual income, no children. Dinks. It's a childless by choice movement.
Yeah.
And the producers are calling me and they're saying, hey, the Dinks argue this. What do you say to that? The Dinks argue this. What do you say to that? And one of the things that's come up, say the Dinks argue that it's super selfish to have children when there are so many kids out there that are in foster care and haven't been adopted. What do you say to that? I'm like, well, I have 7 kids. How many kids have they fostered? Right? Yeah. They don't have any kids at all. They have no kids themselves. They've chosen to be childless. Like, how can they argue that we're selfish because we've chosen like God determine our family size? Like, how is that selfish? Like, I have 7 kids. I don't get anything. I don't even get like quiet time. I get less sleep. I get less money to myself. I don't get vacations like so many of my never married and unmarried peers do. Like, how am I the selfish one? Who the heck are you to call anyone selfish that has a child? Even one child is less selfish than what you have actively chosen. And this is, there are a lot of people that actually I have a lot of friends that are trying to have kids and they're struggling, or it's taken a while for them to have kids. And gosh, my heart goes out to them. But like the people that are actively saying we don't want children, the world's better off with fewer people in it, like that mindset of the world being better off with less people in it, that's not that far removed from the Nazis. That's not that far removed from the Marxists and the communists and the Stalinists. Like, that's a bad mindset. That's an evil mindset. When you're starting to say that that there should be fewer people in the world, that the world will be better off if some people never existed, like, one, who the hell are you to say that, to make that judgment about anyone else, right? Talk tolerance. But 2, like, what are you talking about? Like, we all impact each other in different ways. And even if you're like a 99% bad person, there's still that 1% where you've like helped someone or impacted someone beyond your means. Like, and this is what I'm getting to, is like, God has to be in charge of who lives and who dies. This is a game that human beings will be really bad at playing. And we have been really bad at playing. Like, you look at how many abortions have happened in just America alone. Just America alone, it's like 60 million. You look at people like Steve Jobs. He was adopted, and he changed the world in infinite ways, immeasurable ways. He created Apple, right? Like, we all have an Apple. We all have an iPhone.
Yeah.
What the heck? Like, we're really bad at playing God. We're not good at it, and we need to stop. We need to just accept how many people God sends us, and we'll figure it out, right? Like, the ideal is like no abortions. The ideal is not needing birth control. The ideal is any baby that's conceived has the resources and the parents that it needs to thrive and prosper. That is the ideal. And then from there, you work your way back and you make rules and conditions and exceptions, right? And I think we've gone down a really dark path of deciding that the world is better off with fewer people in it. And that's a Nazi mindset. That's a totalitarian mindset. That's a death cult mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, to the selfishness point that was brought up earlier, I mean, there are some of these individuals that they either are intentionally ignorant of the facts that there's a waiting list of individuals wanting to adopt, and adoption is a very, very high end industry. Tens of thousands of dollars to adopt. I mean, it's just ridiculous to imply that there's just this mass group of individuals not being adopted and the like. And then the other thing too is just they also just neglect the ability for humans to be innovators and to be solution oriented. I mean, so many times they don't want to have kids because it's selfish, because the environment's dying. And then it's like, okay, but then you've got guys like Elon Musk that are creating these big companies specifically to address that. It's like, well, we don't know what kind of genius prodigy was killed in the womb that had the perfect solution to the world's problems, and it's just, to your point, it's we are playing God, and it is not our role, and it shows. And Kristen Ivory, I think her cat walked across her keyboard. And then Shara Joel jumped in the chat. Hey, Shara, appreciate you being here. But anyways, Terry, I know that we are pretty much at our time here, but anything that you want to share about what APP is doing right now in closing?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got a major political campaign here this cycle to get President Trump reelected. We're focusing on the 4 top swing states: Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia. We're going to invest at least $18 million. We've already raised 12 of that. We're hitting the left on all the trans stuff they're pushing on our kids, all of that. Check us out at AmericanPrinciplesProject.org, or follow me on all the social media accounts: Schilling 1776, SCHILLING 1776. And, I just, the family really is the bedrock of society. It really does impact everything that we deal with and everything that we live with. And it's really important that the family is represented. We've had a lack of representation in our legislatures and in Congress, and it's time for a change. We need to make these guys pay a price when they hurt us, when they hurt our kids, and when they make it harder to afford families. And that's what we're all about. So AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. Check us out and let us know what you think.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, Terry. Really appreciate it. And thank you, listener, wherever you are consuming this podcast. Feel free to go to our Substack, forgeandanvil.substack.com. If you wish to join what we are doing there, you can put your email in and get free content to your email. You can also become a paid supporter as well. If you have the means, we appreciate it. But if you're trying to have 7 kids like Terry, you might not have the means right now, and that's okay. We understand. You're doing important things. But no Thursday episode this week from me. I've got some family in town, so things are a little hectic over here. But thank you all for listening. We appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.